Hello and welcome to another video trying to get you the very top grades. Today we're focusing on how to write a literature essay. I'm going to be using An Inspector Calls to show you. I will talk through the 7 things that get you a grade 7 or above. Then I will show you what makes the difference at grade 8 and 9. We'll then look at an opening to an essay written by a viewer, thank you very much, Jeffrey Chan, and then I'm going to teach you this crucial skill of reducing the number of words you use. So Jeffrey Chan's effort was 200 words long, and then step by step I'll show you how to reduce that to 121 words and get more marks. Right, well, what makes at least a grade 7 answer? Well, you start not so much with an introduction but an argument, or what literature students call a thesis. And this means that you set out a series of ideas that you want to prove in the essay. Not just one idea, but more than one. Included in that will be the author's point of view. Now, when you start talking about the author, you're thinking about the piece of literature as a construct. That's the word that the examiners love. And what it means is the author has constructed this piece of fiction in order to get across their points of view. And that obviously links exactly to your thesis or argument. In order to consider the points of view, you really need to know something about the context. So that needs to be included like an embedded quotation to back up your thesis and your consideration of the author's point of view. Because you have to think about this in some depth, you really need to consider at least one possible alternative interpretation, and the easiest way to do that is to think about the context again and the contemporary readers. Contemporary means the readers at the time. So how was the author trying to influence those readers at the time? The next skill is to use tentative language when you're exploring different interpretations. And tentative language means just these 3 words would do, actually. Perhaps, might, and could. So you discuss your new interpretations that way. Obviously, you're used to embedding short quotations. Hopefully, you've watched my videos about why you need to kill P, and don't just write P paragraphs, but P sentences. You'll see that anyway on my channel. And then finally, using academic language to describe literary text, and that doesn't mean naming the parts of speech, noun, adjective, adverb, and so on. It's the kinds of words you need in order to write about literary texts, and you will see that as well. Well, all right, so that's what you need for at least grade 7. Do you need anything extra for grade 8 and 9? And the answer is no, you don't. So what makes the difference? Well, grades 8 and 9 essays are simply longer. They show those skills, but more often, and that's why they're longer. This isn't just a mechanical thing, it helps you build a more convincing argument or thesis. That's obvious, isn't it? The more points you make to back up your argument, the better your argument is. And that's really what's going to take you into grades 8 and 9. Now, if you analyse the number of words that students actually write when they get grades 8 and 9, it's quite a big range. It's at the bottom end about 700, and some of my students write well over 1,000, but you don't have to do that. So this is a typical range, and that's a typical essay writing time, 45 minutes. Now, what I need you to do is train yourself, obviously, in writing speed. And this video is going to show you how you can get all your ideas down in 700 words. Now, you can also use those skills to write more and guarantee your grade 9, okay? But I'm aiming for people who aren't able to write that amount already. So I'm going to show you how to get grade 9 in the 700. So obviously, if you can explain your ideas in fewer words, you can reach grade 9 in 700 words. So let's look at how to explain your ideas in fewer words. So I'm going to read Jeffrey Chan's in its entirety here because it does those 7 things that I talked about at the beginning. But when we get through to the end of it, I'll take you through a paragraph at a time to show you how to reduce it. Actually, do you know what? It'd probably save time if you've freeze the screen if you want to read the whole thing. I'm going to jump straight into the first paragraph. So here we go. Inspector Goole is presented as a sympathetic character. Now, every word in bold is the subject terminology. Remember, I called that, instead of subject terminology, the language, the academic language you need in order to talk about literature. And these are the kinds of words that you need. So Inspector Goole is presented as a sympathetic character through Priestley's use of visual imagery. This is evident when the inspector describes Eva Smith's condition as burnt her insides out, of course. The gruesome imagery used by Priestley, that should be portrays, shouldn't it? Let's just change that. Portrays the Inspector Goole as a sympathetic inspector. Gosh, I didn't edit Mr. Chan's work, sorry. As he is able to relate with Eva's condition, since such detailed descriptions are not what typical police inspectors would provide to suspects. So that was 67 words, but I've added in a couple more. Now, I've shown you here how you can reduce that significantly and make exactly the same points. So because I want to talk about the writer's point of view, I put that first. Priestley comes first. Priestley makes Inspector Goole a sympathetic character by highlighting his empathy for Eva as a victim. And so that's what he means by making us sympathetic to Eva, which is evident in his shockingly gruesome description of her suicide, which burnt her insides out, of course. This emotive language is more human than the neutral tone we might expect from the police. So I've tried to find a literary way, neutral tone, of talking about the language that police would use. Hopefully you can see how I've tried to use my vocabulary, like empathy here, to reduce the number of words. Now, on my next bit, I'm going to show you why this can be got rid of. So we've got an idea here which is a good idea, but nothing is made of it. There's nothing here to say why that's important. So you can actually get rid of that idea because it wasn't important to your argument, which is about creating sympathy. So suddenly I've reduced it down to 34 words. Okay, let's look at the next paragraph. Now here in green I've highlighted all the words that are subject terminology. Perhaps Priestley uses this vivid and gruesome description to shock his audience. So we don't need to know it's vivid and gruesome, that's overkill. In order to make them feel sympathy for Eva's condition. The repeated phrase throughout the inspector's dialogue, of course, implies that the result of Eva's life is common and almost expected. So I've shortened that by getting rid of any repetition. We are invited to sympathise with Eva through this horrific imagery. Just one adjective to describe the imagery is enough. Moreover, the inspector's repeated, of course, I don't need to tell the examiner that this is a phrase because it's not important that it's a phrase. What's important is that it is repeated. It implies that Eva's suicide is commonplace and symbolic of the fate of many working class women. So here I'm looking at the text as a construct, and so Eva is a symbol of lots of working class women, which is what he wants his audience to understand. So I'm getting many more marks here because I'm linking it much more closely to the author's purpose. And I've managed to get rid of 12 words. Similarly, I didn't need to talk about it being a dialogue because it's a play and everything in it virtually is a dialogue. Don't tell the reader what they can already work out simply for themselves. Now, this long section here with the excellent vocabulary, the embodiment of, I can actually reduce down to less than a sentence, which I will add to the previous paragraph. So as Eva Smith is the embodiment of the lower classes, well, do you remember I already made that point here, symbolic of the fate of working class women. So now I don't need this bit. Priestley could have used Eva's horrifying death to show how the upper classes treated them had led to a shocking consequence. Now this is quite typical of good writers who aren't yet brilliant writers. They say something general. It is a shocking consequence, but what about it is shocking? Why is that important? So my translation of that is, as a result of their exploitation by upper class capitalist society. So now you can see my new paragraph is 32 words long compared to the 2 that I showed you joined together here, which was 75. So I hope what you're learning here as we go through the video is that it's very easy to cut down on your number of words by getting rid of the stuff that you don't need to build your argument. And obviously, if you take out any repetition, that's even better. And if you've got any points that you're making that don't link to your argument, get rid of those as well. So as we go through here, the 2 bullet points that seem the most important in reducing your number of words are by including the author's viewpoint and seeing the text as a construct and using the context. Okay, so those 2 seem to be the most useful ones in getting rid of repetition and making sure that your points score you marks all the time. Right, the other thing that you might notice is I keep coming back to the word society because that links me to the context and also the text as a construct that wants to influence society. So let's have a look at this final paragraph. This could be due to the common exploitation of lower classes by the more fortunate middle and upper class families, where they worked long periods of time for very low wages. Therefore, the sympathy of Inspector Gould is used by Priestley to make the audience feel sorry for the lower classes so they could make a change. So nothing wrong with that, it's still going to get you a grade 7, but let's see how I've made it shorter. The inspector insists we see Eva as one of the millions of Eva Smiths the upper classes exploit. Well, now you can see that I've introduced a new quotation, so I'm obviously going to get more marks. And I've linked this quotation to the author's purpose. Eva Smith is a symbol of how the classes exploit working class women. And his role is to help us feel empathy for her tragedy so that we will join Priestley in improving society. So there is the author's purpose spelled out really clearly. Here, there is an author's purpose. Priestley to make the audience feel sorry for the lower classes so they would make a change, but that's not really specific enough. What sort of change? Well, it needs to be a change that's going to improve their lives, which is shown here. So here we have the 200 words reduced to 121 altogether, and you can see from the green that I now have 3 quotations in it instead of 2, and that there is a quotation in each paragraph. And that's actually a really good shorthand for whether you're making enough points to get into the grades 8 and 9. Really, you want a quotation in virtually every single sentence. Let's see how that works. This is one very long opening sentence here. So that's got a quotation in it. Then the next 2 don't, but the next sentence does, and then the next sentence does. So it's nearly every sentence you're putting a quotation in. Let's read through that now and see how it sounds. Priestley makes Inspector Gould a sympathetic character by highlighting his empathy for Eva as a victim, which is evident in his shockingly gruesome description of her suicide, which burnt her inside out, of course. This emotive language is also more human than the neutral tone we might expect from the police. Well, remember, we actually got rid of that because it didn't link to a new argument. So if you were going to argue that the neutral tone made us more sympathetic towards him, then it would work. But if you can't, then it doesn't work here. So I'm actually going to get rid of it now for the reason that I mentioned earlier. I want to demonstrate how in good writing like this, you have a quotation in nearly every sentence. So we are invited to sympathise with Eva through this horrific imagery. Moreover, the repeated of course implies that Eva's suicide is commonplace and symbolic of the fate of many working class women. The inspector insists we see Eva as one of the millions of Eva Smiths the upper classes exploit, and his role is to help us feel empathy for her tragedy so that we will join Priestley in improving society. Now hopefully you can see what a thesis looks like. It says, well, the inspector has to be sympathetic because he makes us sympathetic with Eva, and Priestley wants us to feel empathy for Eva because this will make us join Priestley in trying to improve society, and specifically the lives of the working classes. So you can see that's how a thesis is built up, a series of arguments that build on each other in a short amount of words. So this now becomes 104 words instead of 121 because of the words I got rid of in yellow. So what does that mean for your whole essay? Well, it means you need roughly 7 times that to get to 728 words. And if you look at what we've written so far, there were 3 quotations in those 104 words. So 7 times that is 21 quotations. Now this gives you an easy map to get the grade 9. You want to get around about 20 quotations, short and embedded, whapped into at least 700 words. And the way to practice that is to do exactly as Geoffrey Chan has done here. He's gone through and written down as well as he can everything that's going to get him into the grade 7. He's constantly trying to think of these 7 things, but that is not the end, because that only gets him to grade 7. And I say only because he's capable of more, just as you are. And the trick then is to take your really well thought out piece and think, okay, I'm going to go back to that and I'm going to start improving my academic language, chucking out the bits that I don't need, and I'm going to keep coming back to make sure that I'm doing points 2 and 3 here, always coming back to the author's point of view, always coming back to the idea of the text as a construct. It would help if you could spell, Mr. Salles, and always coming back to the author's viewpoint. Once you have mastered that, grades 8 and 9 are truly easy. And then obviously there is a final point which will be relevant to every single exam you take in every subject, and that is your handwriting speed. If you cannot write 700 words in 45 minutes, then perhaps you can write 600 in 45 minutes. Whatever your starting point, you need to be thinking about improving your speed. And the easiest way to do that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to tell you, is joined up handwriting. But even if you can't do that, keep practicing writing at speed, because in every subject you take, that will give you extra marks, because you will make more points and therefore you'll be higher up the mark scheme. So a massive thank you again to Geoffrey Chan for working so hard and posting his work. If you would like higher grades, don't forget to subscribe, and see you soon on my channel. Goodbye.